So I want to talk a little bit about how we define the distinction between scientific realism and scientific anti-realism, or more specifically, scientific realism and constructive empiricism. So standardly, this is framed in terms of belief, right? The scientific realist is somebody who believes that our best theories are true. The constructive empiricist is somebody who believes that our best theories are empirically adequate, that is, true concerning the observable phenomena, but is agnostic concerning observables. Or we might frame it in terms of like justification of belief. So, the scientific realist says we are justified in believing that our best theories are true. Constructive empiricist, on this framing, would say, we're not justified in believing that they're true. We're only justified in believing that they're empirically adequate, or at least, approximately true or approximately empirically adequate. So you get the point, right? Like that's how it's standardly presented. When I did my scientific realism series in the introduction, I frame it in these terms, in terms of belief and justification of belief. But there are other ways of kind of thinking about the realism debate, and actually, this is not the way that Bas van Fraassen, who was the one who developed constructive empiricism, this is not the way that he thinks about it. Van Fraassen frames the realism debate in terms of a claim about the aim of science. So, realism and constructive empiricism are different views about the aim of science. The realist will say that the aim of science is to produce theories that are true, and then to accept a scientific theory is to believe that it's true, whereas constructive empiricism says that the aim of science is to produce theories that are empirically adequate, and then accepting a scientific theory involves belief that it's empirically adequate. But obviously, we can have beliefs which go beyond what science aims at, right? So in principle, you could be a constructive empiricist. You could think that the aim of science is empirical adequacy, but then you may believe more, right? You may in fact believe that the theories are true, right? You may believe more than what science aims at. Similarly, you can believe less than what science aims at. I may be a realist who believes that science has not and never will provide any justified true beliefs. So I can think that truth is what science aims at. Truth is what we're aiming at, even if I think that we're never going to get it, right? I mean, similarly, I might, for instance, aim for immortality, even though I acknowledge that I'm not actually ever going to achieve immortality. Maybe that's my aim, right? I want to live forever, and I'm going to do everything I can to live forever, even though I recognise that it's not actually going to happen. So the point is that like this kind of gives us a very different conception of what the realism debate is all about. Actually, Van Fraassen kind of says, well, like questions about like belief and the justification of belief is, like he's explicit, like this is tangential to his concern, and he defines he introduces a distinction between the scientific Gnostic, right, who believes that our best theories are true, and the scientific agnostic, right, who will only believe in empirical adequacy, right? That's a tangent to realism versus constructive empiricism. Realism is the claim that science aims for truth. Constructive empiricism, the claim that it aims for empirical adequacy. So I mean, like, I can accept that to believe that I can accept that science is aiming for empirical adequacy, but then I can just say that I guess I have like non-scientific reasons for believing more than that, or something like that. So I mean, there's a few questions about this, right? So I mean, one question is just whether this really makes sense of a lot of the debates that philosophers of science actually engage in, and I think that, well, it doesn't seem to me. It seems like a lot of philosophers of science are interested in the question of belief and justification. Interestingly, this seems to me to even be the case for Van Fraassen. I mean, as much as he explicitly says he's not, when you actually look at what his arguments are, it looks like he's giving arguments that are concerned with belief and justification. When you look at his arguments against supposing that we, see through microscopes, for instance, his like rainbow analogy, his attacks on inference to the best explanation. Because like again, you could in principle say, all right, like maybe inference to the best explanation is like a non-scientific form of inference or something. Um, but anyway, so yeah, I think that framing things in terms of the aims of science doesn't really seem to capture what philosophers of science are talking about. This raises an interesting problem when it comes to presenting the debate. So, when like I said, when I made my videos on scientific realism, I would often talk about constructive empiricism in terms of belief and justification. I didn't talk about it in terms of like the aims of science. And I mean, that's, you might look at that and just say, well, you're misrepresenting Van Fraassen's position, which is a fair point. On the other hand, there's a question of like how much kind of control does the originator of a position have over its interpretation. If we think of constructive empiricism, if we think of it in terms of like Van Fraassen's constructive empiricism, then yeah, that's a doctrine about the aims of science. He's very explicit about that. But if we then think of constructive empiricism more broadly as a position within the scientific realism debate that a lot of realist philosophers have responded to, I mean, certainly many philosophers are treating constructive empiricism as a claim about belief, and they are responding to it in that way. Yeah, I'm not sure. I suppose from Van Frassen's point of view, a lot of that debate is irrelevant, but that's because he frames it in terms of aims, which is something that is not relevant to the concerns of a whole bunch of other philosophers. So, you know, so yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, part of what has prompted this is that I have been thinking about actually doing a video on constructive empiricism, and I have kind of run into this problem where it's like, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, I want to present Van Frassen's position and talk about that, but then on the other hand, when you look at the way that it's been received and the way that that position is talked about by other philosophers, um, they're talking about very often belief and justification. Like their question is, well, are we justified in believing claims about the unobservable world, right? Or should we restrict our belief to, or should we say, like, we can believe what science tells us about the observable phenomena, but we should be agnostic about any claims it makes beyond that. So yeah, I mean, so that's one issue. Is like, right, yeah, how much sort of say does Van Frassen have over what constructive empiricism is? Once you've presented a position, it kind of takes on a life of its own. But the other question though is just whether this framing in terms of the aims of science is reasonable. Like, is that useful? Is that a useful way to think about the realism anti-realism debate? I have to say, I've never found this. I've never really even understood sort of what the claim is, right, when we're talking about the aims of science. So, how do we determine what the aims of science are? Well, one obvious option would just be to look at particular scientists, right? You could look at individual scientists and ask them what they're doing. Or maybe you could look at, particular research teams, because they will often make explicit statements about what their goals are. But Van Frassen rejects this. And it makes sense that he rejects this because he doesn't see claims about the aim of science as being empirical. If I'm asking what are the aims of individual scientists, then obviously that's an empirical claim. That's a topic for the sociology of science, and that would be a scientific question. Philosophy, as Van Frassen sees it, doesn't answer empirical questions, so he doesn't see this as an empirical question. The comparison that he makes is to talk of the aim of chess, right? Like, we would say that the aim of chess, the aim of the game, is to checkmate the opponent's king. Now, when you look at chess players, they might have all sorts of different aims. Like when I'm playing chess, there's all kinds of things that I as an individual might have as a goal. I might be interested in fame, right? Maybe I want to become a really famous chess player. I want to get lots of money and praise. I might be interested in like teaching somebody. Maybe I'm just engaging in the game in order to pass on knowledge of the game to somebody else. I might even be I might even be trying to let the opponent win. So we can say like the aim of chess is to checkmate the opponent's king, but maybe I want the opponent to checkmate my king. Maybe there's some reason why I want the opponent to win. So, like the aim of chess is to checkmate the opponent's king, but individual chess players can have pretty much any aims imaginable. You know, Van Fraassen says the same thing about science, right? The aim of science, as a constructive empiricist sees it, is the production of empirically adequate theories. But individual scientists can have any aims at all. An individual scientist might have the aim of getting to the truth, or an individual scientist might have the aim of acquiring money and fame, or maybe they have the aim of doing any number of things. Maybe their aim is to like undermine the institution of science for some reason. Like maybe they hate science and they've got into science in order to conduct a load of scientific fraud and like. So yeah, so we're not, when we talk about the aim of science, right? We're not talking about the aims of individual scientists or the aim of particular research teams or anything like that. So okay, what are we talking about then? I think part of the problem here is, on the one hand, like when I can kind of see this idea of the aim of chess isn't determined by the aims of any individuals, but then so like, okay, what is it that determines the aim of chess? It seems like that just depends on how we're choosing to characterize the game. Like we've stipulated a bunch of rules, and then we've kind of stipulated a condition that counts as winning, but that's kind of up to us, right? Like, and there's different interpretations you could give of it, because I could just give this like deviant interpretation of every chess game. I could say, well, actually, people are playing Schmess, where the aim of Schmess is to have your king, right? It's like when I'm playing Schmess, the aim of Schmess as a game is to have my king checkmated by the opponent, right? But then like everybody engaging in this game is just doing it in a deviant way where their personal aim is to checkmate their opponent's king, right? So the point is you can kind of stipulate games however you want. You can stipulate the rules. That's what we've done with chess. We've just stipulated a bunch of rules, and we've stipulated, okay, checkmating the opponent's king, that counts as winning. That's just a matter of like how we've chosen to set up the game. So that still seems to depend on our goals and our aims, because if we had chosen to set up the game in a different way, if we had different aims with respect to the game, then the aim of chess would be different. So it seems. But in the case of science, it's much more tricky, because like there's all sorts of things. How do you, like, science doesn't have like some clear set of rules in the way that chess does, and a sort of kind of win condition or a success condition that we all agree on in the way that chess does. Like there isn't something that actually, what would count as like a win in science? See, in chess, right, you got, okay, two people playing a game, one checkmates the opponent's king, and then the game's over, right? In science, the game is never over. There might be like two theories on the table that are like competing, and maybe one theory knocks out the other one, right? One theory is shown to be disconfirmed, but then that doesn't mean like the game is over. It's not like that one scientist will be like, okay, I've won now, that's it. You just carry on dealing with other problems, and new problems are going to emerge that you're going to continue dealing with, and maybe the theory that won is going to be displaced by some other theory. The theory that won, you continue to test it. So yeah, it doesn't seem like science really has like an end, a termination point in the way that chess does. I mean, maybe I'm sort of reading too much into Van Fraassen's chess analogy, but the point is just it seems to me much more difficult to even know what we're talking about when we talk about the aim of science. I can't help but feel like, for all of his empiricist credentials, when Van Frassen talks about the aim of science, it really feels like he's just kind of reifying some like abstract conception of science. It's like the Platonic form of science, which doesn't seem to have any relation to the actual work or practices or thoughts of individual scientists. Um, I mean, even things like, for instance, so when Van Fraassen says, the aim of science is empirical adequacy, right? We would then point out, well, there's lots of things scientists do beyond that, like they try to give explanations, um, and then Van Fraassen will say, well, that's just like part of the pragmatics of science, right? Like it doesn't really matter whether or not you give an explanation in terms of the success condition, right? Like the success condition is just getting an empirically adequate theory. Whether you have, I don't know, an explanatorily useful theory, or whether you have a theory that is simple and easy to apply, that's just a pragmatic issue. So it does feel to me like we have this, platonic form of science that again is not connected to what scientists are actually doing. In the real world, there are a bunch of different scientists, a bunch of different research groups. They've all got different aims. Um, they've all got various different connections to the rest of society, various different thoughts. Um, and I just don't know what we're talking about. If like when we try to attribute an aim of science, if we're not just talking about the aims of individual scientists. And I think actually, all of this kind of it points to a deeper problem, which is that like even even if you can attribute some aim to science, it's like who cares? I mean, why is that interesting? So let's say I just agree that the aim of science is the construction of empirically adequate theories, in the same way that the aim of chess is checkmating the opponent's king. Let's say I just grant that, right? I agree with that. Um, well, so what? I mean, like, what, what do I sort of take from that? What follows from that? I mean, like, why would I care about this? I mean, so this aim of science, it doesn't tell us anything about what scientists ought to do. It doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us anything about like how they should go about constructing their theories. I mean, like Van Frassen grants, individual scientists can have a whole bunch of different aims. Like an individual scientist can have the aim of true belief, right, or the aim of acquiring fame. So the mere fact that the aim of science is empirical adequacy, that's not going to. If I'm a scientist, that's not going to tell me what my aim should be. And this claim about the aim of science, it doesn't even give us information about what scientists do in fact, think, or how they do in fact behave, because it's not a sociological thesis. So I don't know. It's hard to see. It's hard to see what's being claimed, and it's hard to see why I should even care, right? Why it even matters what's being claimed. Um, you know, I guess my one way to put it is like this. I don't really care what some random individual. If you take some random individual, I don't really care what their aims are. Like if uh, Frank the scientist has the aim of acquiring lots of money for himself. Like maybe that's why he got into it. Um, Maybe that wasn't the most sensible career choice, given that that was his aim. But like if it okay, it turns out that's his aim. Well, I don't really. Yeah. So what? I mean, good for him. I don't have to have that aim. In the same way, if this abstract Platonic science has the aim of empirical adequacy, okay. Um, I don't know. I don't know why that would matter to me. And it seems like even Van Frassen would, kind of acknowledges that, yeah, like my aims do not in any sense need to match the aims of science. So again, if I'm a scientist, obviously I'm not a scientist, so why would they be? But like as a scientist, I can, aim for more than empirical adequacy, or I can aim for less. Um, so I don't know. I feel like I don't see the appeal of framing the realism anti-realism debate in terms of the aims of science. Maybe I'm just missing something here, but I've never seen the appeal of it, and it doesn't seem to, like I say, it doesn't really seem to connect to what a lot of other philosophers. In fact, it seems to me most philosophers who are engaging in the realism anti-realism debate aren't particularly interested in questions about the aims of science. They're interested in questions about, you know, justified beliefs, right? What are we justified in believing? That seems to me to be the question that motivates most participants in the realism anti-realism debate. Which is why, when I've talked about constructive empiricism, at least in the context of an introduction, I talk about it in a way which, I think you could reasonably say is just missing Van Fraassen's point. But then I'm not really sure what Van Fraassen's point actually is on this issue. So yeah, there you go. I don't think we should frame realism, anti-realism in terms of the aims of science. I wonder if there are any other sort of realism, anti-realism debates that are framed in terms of aims. Because when you think about like moral realism, moral anti-realism, well, that's not framed in terms of aims, right? Again, that's a question about belief and justification, right? Are we justified in believing that there are moral facts? Or maybe it's like a metaphysical claim, right? Are there moral facts in the world? But like we wouldn't say that the moral realist is somebody who like to be a moral realist is to think that I don't know moral practices aim towards moral facts, or I don't know maybe we would say that. Maybe we would say that, but that's not how I've usually seen the debate. The moral realism, anti-realism debate presented, and realism, anti-realism in general doesn't usually seem to be presented that way. It's a very interesting sort of quirk of Van Fraassen's philosophy, I guess. Anyway, that's all I have to talk about today.